So on tonight's Active Travel Cafe, we'll have our usual news roundup for the first 10-15 minutes or so. And then we're really pleased to have Dinah Borat, who's the co-director of ZCD Architects. And I've kind of followed Dinah's work for a long time, and I'm really, really excited to have her here tonight. She's quite unusual in being an architect and researcher and being really interested in children and young people, particularly. I think she's going to talk tonight about young people and including them in planning and designing new and redesigning urban spaces. And then following that, we have Mark, aka Ranty Highwayman, who is going to do his usual good, bad, and the interesting slot. And I'm not sure what he's going to talk about tonight. So we're looking forward to that too. So on that note, does anybody have any news to share this week? I think there's been quite a few things going on, so I'm sure there will be plenty of people who have something to say. Ruth, you got a hand up.
Very quickly, there was a particularly nasty crash on the A40, actually on the cycle lane. Some of you may have seen it, where a driver at 7:40 something in the morning left the carriageway, smashed into the barrier, and has very severely injured this man who's a plumber, father of 4, I think. Absolutely shocking. We cycle there, it's horrendous. It's just awful. The junctions are awful and it's awful. But I'm particularly minded to be angry about this on his behalf, because the BBC have chosen this week to launch their Scarlett's Driving School, where this woman talks jokingly about it taking her 13 times to pass her test. And I really think that we need to look again at how driving is seen as a right rather than a privilege, and might avoid that kind of horrendous crash that we've been reading about. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. Yeah, I saw that. That's really was very upsetting news. Simon, you've got a hand up. Do you want to come?
On slightly more positive news, we've had 2 big kind of bits of news from TfL. One is today, the second phase of the direct vision lorry standard has moved forward. So basically from next year, from October next year, what was a kind of a 5-star system for lorries with only 1-star lorries having to get a permit and having to face fines or having to get like cameras and sensors, it's now up to 3 stars. And they've ratcheted up the kind of the sensors and things like that. So we now have a situation where lorries should get quite significantly safer in London come October next year. Yesterday, TfL also released a load of 20-mile-an-hour stuff about their rollout of 20-mile-an-hour across London, essentially showing that 20-mile-an-hour rollout has had a really positive impact on serious and fatal collisions, vulnerable collisions with vulnerable road users, and collisions in general for that matter. So we tweeted about it yesterday from LCC, highlighting the fact that there are a whole bunch of London boroughs who still have got basically no 20-mile-an-hour zones or virtually none whatsoever, etc. So I think 20-mile-an-hour for London is certainly proving really a positive thing.
Thanks, Simon. And actually, related to that, I think we have Adrian Berendt here who's going to talk about that. Are you? I think I saw you earlier then, Adrian. Are you?
Yeah, I'm here. Did you want me just to just do another minute on that? So I'm Adrian Berendt. I'm the 2020 coordinator for the south of England, which is basically from Cornwall up to the Wash. And if I can just share my screen briefly, you'll see this. These are the data that Simon was referring to. It's an astonishing 63% reduction in pedestrian casualties in London since the 20 miles an hour came in on the arterial roads. And what you'll notice down in the on the left-hand side, it talks about the speed reductions are between 1.7 and 5 miles an hour. To some people that doesn't sound a lot, but generally you reckon on a 6% reduction in casualties for each mile an hour reduction in speed. So that equates to a 30% reduction in casualties, which is sort of what we've seen. And this data actually backs up stuff we've seen elsewhere in the country. These dots all represent the reduction in speeds at different before mean speeds. And this is from a whole load of places: Scottish borders, Oxfordshire, Wales, Kent, loads of places. And what it shows is a very tight correlation between the before speeds and the drop in speed. So in other words, the faster the road was before, the greater the reduction. And this is really important. If any of you are talking to any of your local authorities about trying to get 20 miles an hour in, they'll tell you, oh yeah, but it only makes a mile an hour difference. It doesn't. It makes a much bigger difference than that, and particularly on the faster roads. So anybody who'd like to help or any questions on 20 miles an hour, I'm very happy to take it offline. Thanks.
Thanks, Adrian, and thanks for sharing those slides. Are they available on your website?
Sort of. I mean, I can send. Do you want to? I'm happy for them to be posted on the.
Yeah, that'd be great if you want to send them to us. Yeah, thank you. Bob, do you have something? Oh, you're muted.
Mute, yes. First thing is, in London, Andy Cox is coming back as he's going to be dealing with the programme for getting new trust in the police in London. I think he's exactly the right person for that. Also, he did a very good tweet attacking the victim blaming of Police Scotland, where there'd been some 6 pedestrians killed over a short period of time, including during the day. And he said, look, we shouldn't be doing this. We should be talking about drivers, not getting into victim blaming. That's very good. You wouldn't have had that from a senior police officer a long time ago. And it's also important because the police officer making the demand in the first place had said pedestrians are vulnerable road users. As you know, I hate that phrase. Therefore, implication being it's up to them to look out for themselves. That's Andy Cox's thing. Quick thing backing up what Simon said about the direct vision lorries. I first became involved in this issue about lorry drivers killing cyclists in 1992. So it can take you 30 years to get stuff happening. And the third thing, I've just forgotten. What was it? Do you remember what it was? Oh, yes. There was an article in The Sun, which was retweeted by All Party Parliamentary Group for Cycling and Walking, where they said that in the coming budget or pre-budget statement, Active Travel England's budget is going to be cut massively. We don't know if that's true or not. It's a rumour. I obviously don't trust The Sun to tell the truth all the time, but it's a possibility, and Active Travel England has kept me going for the last 2 or 3 years, so I do hope it doesn't get cut back badly. That's it.
Thanks, Bob. Claire?
Yeah, thanks, Sally. I was just going to quickly share my screen and show something that something from the Office of National Statistics that I thought was really interesting. It came out today or yesterday, which is basically about travel to work data and how many people or not are now working from home. So this is from the ONS, their Twitter account, and I think what's interesting is I think it just shows this like increasing split between, I guess, kind of middle class and white collar working from home, hybrid working, and then so you can see the massive kind of difference there. And then when you scroll up here, this is also really interesting about kind of an age hierarchy as well, in terms of young people massively likely to need to travel to work and unable to work from home. 65% of young people, no option to work from home. So just that's really interesting in terms of like proving, I guess, some data that shows how the different modelling that we're going to need behind our kind of public transport services, which in the past a lot of the assumptions have been around kind of commuting and white collar workers commuting. So just offering that. Thanks.
Thanks, Claire. Mark?
Yeah, well, I was just going to comment a bit on what Bob said, but also that the closing date for bids to Active Travel Fund 4 is a week on Friday. 5 o'clock a week on Friday. And we managed to get a meeting in Brighton tomorrow, Thursday, a very late meeting, because that's all the time that was given. I think with regard to what Bob said in the Sun, I think this is a typical government kite flying exercise. If lots of people say, yeah, cut the money, they'll do it. And if lots of people don't back it up, they'll say, oh, we never said it. It was just a leak in the press, and no one ever had that idea. So I think it's incumbent to start, checking things at it, not retweeting it, but start supporting why they should be having more money, because otherwise it'll just be seen as something that people want. So that's the depressing side of things. But it's an unattributable leak as usual.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Robin.
A couple of things from Oxfordshire. One is that we have 3 new active travel officers starting this month, which is great. Having waited a while, of course, 3 come along at once. One is a transport planner, one is focused on activation, and one is focused on schools. And they'll be covering more than active travel, in that they'll be doing buses as well, but that will help the School Streets programme. And then we also have a report. I'm not sure if this focus has been on active travel news at Café before, but it's a report done by the University of Bristol. I think I might be wrong there. I'll have to click on it. But a report on active travel in market towns used Bicester and Witney in Oxfordshire as case studies, and followed about 30 people cycling and walking around with GoPro cameras, and people walking around them and kind of watching their experience and what was good and what was bad, and why they'd cycle or walk and why they wouldn't. But I'll paste a link to it in the chat because it'd be interesting for people, particularly with market towns in their patch, as to what's good and what's bad. I don't think there's any massive surprises in there, but it all helps to build the evidence bank.
Thanks, Robin. Yes, that would be really useful. Sam. Is Sam there?
Yeah. Hi. Thanks for inviting me to the group brief. So I'm the developer of a product called Speed Come Anywhere. Some of you may have seen this. This is one of the big barriers to active travel is danger posed by people speeding, and also one, as Adrian pointed out, that
Sam, we're not able to hear you very well. I don't know whether you've got an issue with your microphone.
No. Any better?
Do you want to try again?
Can you hear me?
Yep, I think that's better.
So hi, I'm the developer for a product called Speed Come Anywhere. So this is, some of you may have seen this. This is a product which it's an app on your phone where you can measure the speed of vehicles and get evidence of the vehicle speeds, which I think is a big, as we know, a big block of active travel is the speed of vehicles. It's currently going through a review process with the police. So far, it's looking quite good. But yeah, I'd be very interested in people's feedback from it. There's a few people on here will already have seen it. But yeah, I'd like to make people aware of this technology that's available. Another thing that we've done. Can I share a screen? Sally,
yeah, go for it.
Have you got this guy?
Yeah.
So another bit of research we've been doing, we're a data science company, is on the effect of speed limits or maximum speeds on emissions. So it's probably people who've campaigned for 20-mile-an-hour zones will know one of the big rebuttals is that 20-mile-an-hour zones increase emissions. We did a bit of research into this and found that was basically absolute nonsense, because wherever there's a 20-mile-an-hour zone, the traffic is stopping and starting, and the effect of the stopping and starting massively affects the emissions. So we did a bit of research here that shows that, I slide up and see the graph here. So this is the effect on CO2 emitted from, what vehicle was this? This is a BMW X5. The CO2 emitted as a function of the speed limits, what we can see is quite a substantial reduction in the CO2 emitted when the speed limit drops from a 30 to a 20-mile-an-hour zone. We modelled it with several different vehicles. There's a BMW X5 in there. There's a Mazda SUV in there. There's a Ford Focus in there. And again, we can see that everything we found was that we got lower CO2, we got lower NOx. This paper is currently being reviewed by the Transport Research Laboratory. They've gone through it. They're pretty happy with our findings. So hopefully that's going to be something that the Welsh Assembly are now going to use as part of their evidence to introduce the 20-mile-an-hour zones. I'll put a link in the chat at the end if people are interested. Go and read it. Yeah, get back to us with any questions on it. But yeah, if you're ever having that debate with people, what's the effect of 20-mile-an-hour zones on emissions? This is quite a good resource to look at. And again, if you're interested in how we can potentially enforce 20-mile-an-hour zones, do have a look at Speak Come Anywhere.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. If you want to post that link in the chat, and then people can take their time to look at it. Actually, in relation to that, I think the news is the Welsh government's announced today that they're scrapping current road building plans, so on environmental grounds. So that's no doubt more to do with budgets possibly than the environment, but it's good news anyway. Max, do you have something?
Hi everyone. Just some news that tomorrow work starts on a new TfL cycle hire station in the UK's most densely populated MSOA, according to Rory Meakin, Maida Hill. Some people on the call might be like, oh God, not more cycle infrastructure for Westminster, but actually Westminster North has very little and is very deprived, and there's a very big sort of transport infrastructure as well as life expectancy gap when it comes to North Paddington versus the bits of Westminster that you might think of immediately around the palace. So it's really good news for the expansion of that public hire network. And yeah, work is starting on street tomorrow for that, and it's one of 5 stations that we're hoping to install, which will expand the network out into the more deprived northern reaches of the borough.
That's great news. Thanks for sharing that. Simon, I'm going to let you come in with the final piece of news, and then we're going to move on to our speaker section.
I might have said it already, but just Max reminded me, and it's so good we should say it twice or 3 times or possibly 5 times, but Max is partly responsible for Westminster's first ever cycle track. So we're in consultation for Westminster at the moment, and so huge kudos. You could hear me getting emotional on the call because that is something I didn't think I'd probably ever see in my lifetime. So we've got Westminster moving forward on cycle tracks, which is just brilliant.
Yeah, that's great news. Thanks, Simon. So we'll move on to the next section of tonight, and that is our speaker slots. So tonight we're really pleased to have Dinah Borat here, who, as I mentioned at the beginning, is an architecture and researcher, and she has particular interest in creating places with and for young people. So I'm going to let her introduce herself properly. And Dinah, do you want to share your screen?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My headphones in. I've just moved out of the office. It's a bit weird. Can you all hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yeah? Good. Hi, Simon. How are you? Nice to see you. Don't think I know anyone else. Simon and I were at secondary school together, which is fitting because I'm going to talk a bit about teenagers. So just cast your mind back. I used to get the bus to school. It was quite dull, actually. I used to wait at the bus stop. And if you talk to teenagers these days, buses are a big part of their life. I'm just going to start to share my screen. So as Sally said, and I think, Sally, we met quite a few years ago, didn't we?
Yeah, before the pandemic.
In the kind of circuit of young people. I got into sort of working around working with young people around the idea of play streets and playing out, and I'm not really good friends with the playing out lot in Bristol. And from my point of view as an architect and urban designer, I suppose, I thought this is a planning issue, not a voluntary streets issue. It's a kind of something we need to be thinking about in terms of planning policy and urban design. And I'm pleased to say that it's definitely is now thought about that. I think it's true to say that community engagement is a kind of an important part of planning policy, and so for good reason, children and young people are now seen as being important citizens and active members of the community that you need to engage with. So for us, that's good because it means that we get lots of work, but also I think there are other areas where children's participation is possibly overlooked, and streets may be one of those. And I'm going to sort of give you some good reasons to engage with them and thoughts on some of the things that they might be telling you that might kind of you might be able to reflect on. So here's some people in our practice, and we're in Town Hamlets, so we've just had a lovely engagement leaflet through the door about whether we would like to rip up the LTNs or leave them as they are. You won't be surprised that I actively ticked the box for leave them as they are, which was presented in quite a negative way. Anyway, back to our work. So we've done lots of research with children and young people, and that's mostly to do with sort of what we call the public realm, so streets, but open spaces and parks and places that they hang out and play. Because when you kind of hit secondary school particularly, that space outside your front door suddenly becomes really important. It's how you get to school, it's how you're kind of moving around the city in very different ways from adults. It's where you meet your friends, it's where you hang out in groups, it's where you do things that are quite different, if you like, from how you used to when you were younger and how you probably will as you get older. And to a greater or lesser extent, teenagers, young people are often kind of quite feared because their behaviour is so sort of unlike younger children, and unlike adults, and we get a bit confused about why they're doing the things that they're doing, what motivates them. Mostly they're motivated to be in the group and to be with each other and their friends, not to rob us and stuff like that and do antisocial things deliberately. And so we've got to really think about them as children. I think one of the things we do is we think about the kind of full breadth of childhood, taking us up to the age of 18, where we still have got a duty to these young people to keep them safe, even though they might be kind of adult-sized human beings. So some research there, but also some policy that we've been working with. There's the London Plan on the right-hand side, and we've been quite influential, I think, in thinking about how children and play space is delivered in London, but also this one in the middle, which is a research report about how we can make London child-friendly, which very much talks about what was called children's independent mobility. And I think that's quite an interesting topic in itself, and as I would argue has evolved quite a lot over the last 20 years, if you like, and thinking more about how children move around the city. So what we try to do as architects and as kind of suppose creative thinkers is we try to think of, or as designers, we try to think of creative ways of working with young people. So we've got lots of kind of survey types and stickers and collage and photography, and we just use lots and lots of ways to get them to basically talk about their lived experience. And like all people can talk really well about their lived experience, it's much harder to ask them to envisage a future that might be better than the one they're in right now, but they can certainly tell you with great detail what life is like right now. And so if you ask the right questions about their environment and the streets and the transport that they use, you'll get some really good answers. And you can either do that in focus groups and qualitative ways, or you can do really big data sets. And I'll show you in a minute some of the surveys we've been doing with secondary schools. We get all the projects that we work on, and I'm going to show you a couple, one in Waltham Forest and one in Kensington and Chelsea, which are two quite interesting and different boroughs. I'm sure you know of them both quite well for obvious reasons. Waltham Forest being the one, the home to Lily Holland, I'm sure you all know that, and then Kensington having the complete lack of any cycling infrastructure. But taking a step back from those two things, if you like, and just thinking about these two schools that we've worked with. This is a school in Chingford, and a project we worked on with two secondary schools and a primary school, looking at an area called Chingford Mount, and working with the secondary and the primary school. And interestingly, just getting into the logistics of it, what tends to happen when we work with young people is first of all, it's really easy to get to them. There's a kind of like hard to reach phrase that's often attached to young people, which is just insane because they're all in school. So they're really easy to reach. They're probably easier to reach than any other age group. And so you've got a kind of available cohort of young people. And what tends to happen is you either work with schools or youth clubs, and we find working with schools can be much easier, more structured. And when we work with the secondary schools, they often will give us a smallish group of young people, and we can really start to have interesting conversations with them about the places that they go to. This is a group who are standing in, I think, Walthamstow Market in Walthamstow Central, but they come from Chingford Mount, which is in the north of the borough, and where there's kind of little or no cycling infrastructure, and the public realm, is kind of in need of improvement. But you've got a kind of different, I'm right in saying, political sort of context, in that you've got Ian Duncan Smith as the MP, and I think probably more Tory councillors than in the south of the borough. So north of the borough went for some levelling up funding, which they didn't get, but it was around looking to make Chingford Mount more child friendly. So that involved lots and lots of surveys with young people. And actually, one of the things we started to do recently is to, when we work with the secondary school, doing some sort of qualitative work with the small groups. When we work with the primaries, they tend to want us to do their entire year group. So it's great, we can get a good data set, but primary schools have got good hands-up sustainable transport data that everybody's using. And what I'm going to say to you just to start with is, how many of you have got good data sets about secondary school transport? Because I reckon probably hardly any of you. And actually there's loads of information about school streets, there's loads of information about parents' choices of transport, and there's very little information about that group that then moves on to secondary school and has got different travel needs and different travel kind of wants, and is about to enter the labour market and become the next group of adults. And we're suddenly, they're out of view, and some really interesting changes are happening at that point in their lives. What we forgot to ask this group was the question that we asked the primary schools, which is, how would you like to travel to school? And I'll show you a survey in a minute, which we did do in RBKC. So, but what's interesting is that if you can give out a Google form link to a secondary school, we got something like 200 responses. Now that's quite a good data set from that secondary school across all the year groups for that part of the borough. And so you can see here that it's a secondary school, not surprisingly, quite a large number are coming by bus because there's a big greater distance to go to school. 61 of them, so this is not a percentage, walked, and quite a large number are coming by car. So in the north of the borough, it's quite suburban, very small number are cycling. And I think that what happened actually when we talked to them anecdotally, there isn't a big desire to get to cycle to school. And I think this is something we need to be kind of aware of, is how young people consider cycling to be part of their sort of daily transport kind of desire. I think about this age group a lot, and obviously I can see them riding the Santander bikes, riding the Line bikes without paying for them. And that's really interesting, their kind of use of bicycles for pleasure. But I think that also a lot of them just don't want to ride to school. And you might argue that that's because of cycling infrastructure, but it also might just be the way our city works and the way in which they want to kind of hang out with each other. And obviously we could move to a kind of Dutch model, but young people are sometimes surprisingly lazy, and that's a terrible word to say, but they do just quite like sitting and chatting to each other a lot. The bus is quite a good way of doing that. So just getting a bit more information around this, I think, would really help us think about how they move around the city, what they want, and then how we might need to sort of change hearts and minds. There's also very little education at that age around sustainable transport options. Quite shockingly, actually, and this is very anecdotal, my son the other day came home with happened to be leave lying around a copy from his geography textbook that said how the car industry was moving towards a really green, sustainable future because they were building more electric vehicles. So that's his sustainable transport education that he's receiving right now from what might be 5 years ago, and or without any kind of reflection on whether that is the future that we want for from a transport point of view. So there's a big group of people that are not being educated about sustainable transport and may start to not make the right choices. On the right hand side, as I said, this is a primary school survey, so maybe more familiar to you with the kind of hands up stuff in a suburban situation. Anyway, being architects, we've got some public realm proposals for how we can improve Chingford Mount, and so thinking about the ways in which young people might want to hang out there. So we worked with them on co-designing these spots. We had to repeatedly change this image until it had more and more older people on, not middle-aged or young adults, but older people, but under the requirements of our client, who said that would otherwise not go down very well in the local area. So anyway, this we're hoping we'll get funding and we will get to see better sort of town centre spaces where young people could feel free to hang out. So that's a bigger part of a bigger project. And now I'm just going to move to RBKC, and I just think it's a really interesting borough. And we're also working on the Earls Court development site, which is massive, and working with a group of young people and older people together. So this is quite groundbreaking. We're bringing in different age groups to talk about public realm and people's needs. But before that, this is a project we were working on where, again, like Waltham Forest, we're looking at high streets, and the High Streets Recovery Fund is kind of covering research around this sort of thing. And Centre for London's done a big project on high streets in the borough, and we're just talking to young people with a kind of pilot that they can roll out in other town centres, high streets across the borough. So this is Notting Hill Gate, and the Youth Council chose Notting Hill because it's a sort of central high street in the borough. And it's if you know Notting Hill Gate, it's got Kensington High Street running through it, running through it with no cycle infrastructure, but also it's quite narrow pavements, quite a busy street. And the way young people react to that is that they tend to sort of spill out of Holland Park Secondary School, and it sort of overcrowd the streets, in their own words, and it's not particularly friendly environment for them. We're designing a kind of youth hub with them as part of the work that we're doing. So thinking about ways that we can reappropriate the high street and make spaces for young people. Cynically, all these services are being cut, so this kind of provision isn't exactly meeting the needs of young people, but it's answering a problem around sort of high street decline. So as part of the survey that we did with the school, we asked them what were the good things about Notting Hill Gate, what were the bad things about Notting Hill Gate. So what's really interesting, and I haven't got time to show this, but was that working with the primary and the secondary school is watching that transition from primary to secondary, where the primary school children are really kind of excited about being free, going to school by themselves without their parents, playing outside and all of those things. And then these are the year 5 kids, year 6 kids that we were working with. And then 3 years later, in year 8 and 9, they are being banned from the shops, being stop and searched, and being catcalled on the high streets. And suddenly their kind of freedom that they've been given is being kind of taken away with kind of almost sort of violent means in some respects. And it's really quite shocking how young people have to go from one, as they grow up, into this really hostile environment. And for them, transport is a problem. Too many people, too many cars, too dirty and noisy, you can see here. So traffic is an issue, but it might not be one of the major issues. One of the big things for them is actually kind of other adults behaving badly towards them. So just kind of thinking of their environment and how they're getting around and stuff is really important. And I'm just going to finish with this slide and this graphic that we came up with, which we did ask the question, how did you travel to school today? And then how would you like to travel to school? And we thought it was quite interesting because on the left-hand side, you can see, again, the numbers rather than the percentages of them that walked and took the bus and then also took the car. And you won't be surprised to see that statistic is in RBKC quite high in terms of the car, although they're right next to a main tube station. Car usage in the borough is high. But what's worrying is the number of young people that would rather come but to school by car than already do at the moment. And like I said, you know, it depends. Sometimes we might ask a question and get an answer that we don't want. And this might not be the answer that we'd be looking for. We might be expecting like a nice variety of cycling and scooting, and maybe a reduction in bus and more walking, but there's a reduction in walking and a few more fun ways, but an increase in car. And you might ask them why that is, and they'll tell you because the buses are crowded, because I can't get on, because I can't sit down, because actually it's quite nice to be in the car, it's quiet, I can have a chat with my dad. And I think we can kind of ignore all these things, but like I said, this is the next generation, and the choices that we're giving them and the environment that they're experiencing, the more negative it is, the more they're being banned from shops, the more they're being told to move on, the more they're getting stop and search, the more they're looking for ways to duck out. And the car might be offering them that kind of future. So I think we really need to talk to this age group, and we really need to get under the skin of what's making them what they care about, because if they don't make the right choices at this time in life and start to see other ways of getting around the city, then we're growing another generation with exactly the same problems that we've got right now. So that's the end of my talk.
Oh, thanks, Dinah. God, there's loads in there. That's really, really interesting. Loads of food for thought. I could ask you lots of questions. I'll start off with one and then I'll open it up to other people. That idea of sociability and what kind of current options offer in terms of sociability. What do you think can be? What do we not know enough about, and what might we do to make more sustainable options more attractive to young people? And I'm just thinking also, just I suppose slightly related to that, I wonder whether one of the reasons the car is attractive is also because, although we talk a lot about independent mobility, actually young people like to spend time with their parents as well sometimes. So I don't know if that's something that came up, but yeah, thinking around that idea of sociability and what is it that we're not, I mean, we are sort of ignoring motivation, I suppose, aren't we, for different modes of transport?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think we just need more data. So that's one thing. We just need to find clever ways of finding out what young people are thinking right now. And then in terms of sort of hearts, this was just asking me about gender. In terms of sort of hearts and minds, I think what tends to happen with young people is that they just want lots of choices. And I think that's true for lots of people, but they want lots of choices. And my guess is they actually might want lots of choices like on different days of the week. So kind of rather than just thinking there's one answer, I think the more choice you give and the more easy you make it, then the more easy it is going to be for them to try new things out. So I think I'm trying to remember, we asked them whether, they would cycle to school, but there's also other issues around bicycle ownership, and, they're growing quite quickly. And what we found in Chingford was that they might have learned to cycle, and they might all be cyclists at a young age, but they don't have a bike anymore. So they had a bike when they were younger, but they don't have one now. And so things like that, where you kind of go, well, it's going to be hard to get them to cycle if they don't own a bike. I mean, I think we should just be allowing young people free rein to use all the cycle hire schemes across London, because then we'll make cyclists out of them straight away. I think everybody thinks it's all the young people that are leaving them lying around, and therefore they must be taught how to behave properly. But I think we could go completely the other way and be over generous and go, just take them, just play on them, just get used to being on those streets on bikes, and then, get your own bike when you're older. We could look at data on who was choosing different modes of transports between genders, and that would be another way of sort of drilling down into sort of intersectional gender issues. But I think, I think girls and boys are both suffering out there on the streets in terms of their feelings of safety. Boys also don't feel safe for issues to do with other boys or adults or the police, and that's really common.
Yeah, I think some young people I've spoken to here, a lot of them use the scooters, the e-scooters that you can hire, but a doubt for travel to school. But like you say, sort of recreationally, and I imagine that if you've got, if you know, it relies on all your friends having those same kind of options, doesn't it? And if you've got a bike but your friend hasn't, and you want to go to school with your friend, then you know. I think there's a lot of assumptions that, well, they can use public transport, but I mean, I had got the bus to school every day and I absolutely hated it. So I think, yeah, we've got to think about the fact that they need, you know, choice, I guess. I can see a couple of hands up now. Adrian, I think you had your hand up first.
Yeah, Dinah, I've got a bit of data I can share with you if you want. From Faversham, we did some surveys with some of the children at grammar school there. One little anecdote was there is a bus which comes into Faversham, which drops people off at the Abbey School. All the QE students, Queen Elizabeth School, stay on because they don't want to get off the bus with the other school students because they're frightened of getting beaten up or something. And they end up staying on the bus for about another 20 minutes, even though they go about another half a mile because it goes around the houses. So there's a bit of inertia there, and a bit of actually, if you just had a proper stop that was separate from the other school, maybe they would get off and walk that. I think it's no more than about 800 metres to their school. And just in Tunbridge Wells, the experience is that we've got one school which has got some semi-decent cycling infrastructure, and there are quite a lot of students cycling. On all the other schools, there is no safe infrastructure and almost nobody cycling. I really think in those circumstances, it just comes down to the infrastructure. If the infrastructure is there for them to cycle safely to school, they will do it. Because then it then becomes cool.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. Yeah, I'm sure you're right. But I think they do have slightly different travel kind of desires at that age than their parents do, and then that you do as adults. But it's interesting that point you said about the study in Faversham, because they tell you things that you just wouldn't have thought of. And that's what's really important. Just for us not to assume this is what they're doing and that's why they're doing it. When you start to talk to them, they're like, oh, we do that because of that. And then you're like, oh, that makes sense.
Carrying books is a big thing, of course.
Yeah.
Thanks, Adrian. Claire, you got a question?
Thanks. Yeah, it was about, so we have a school street near where I live for primary school, and one thing I've noticed since we started it this year is just kids kind of coming to school together. This is obviously under 12s, and just that sort of sociability aspect. And for that age group at this school, obviously you can't generalize. It just feels like you can hear their excited voices. They're walking down the street going, yay, the school street, yay, we get to kind of have a more social experience. So I just wondered, obviously that's not a scientific study, but I just wonder about this kind of transition from primary school to secondary school. And like, it seems to me that, you know, at that under 12 age, there is a lot of kind of joy in that, and maybe that how is that changing by the aging and the moving into secondary school? Do you observe that?
Yeah, I think it's just that you know, in that particular borough, and LBKC is quite unusual, but we were actually, for the first time, we had stories from teenagers telling us about being run over, and that's not a thing we usually hear as a kind of, you know, kind of common story, because there's just so many cars on the streets in LBKC. But the thing that shocked us the most, and shocked the borough actually, shocked the regeneration department, was the idea that they were so excited to have this freedom, so excited to just be able to play outside on their street, outside the school or at home. And that when they got that freedom, when they were a bit older, when they were 13, suddenly they just felt like McDonald's had banned them from going into the shop at all in their uniform. So they essentially just felt like they were being they were criminalized. Some of the boys, one of the 13-year-old boys had been stopped and searched 3 times already. One of them, I mean, just for nothing. And that's horrible. He's 13 years old, and he, you know, whether he's tall is irrelevant. He's a child, and the girls were getting catcalled, and so suddenly this freedom that they were excited for had been kind of crushed. When they were looking at the kind of realities of adulthood and having to deal with the bus and the sort of the longer commute. So I think sort of just sort of understanding their everyday lived experience and being a bit more sympathetic and empathetic towards what they're going through. They're incredibly sensitive at that age, and yet they're kind of seen as these sort of antisocial adults. And I think we do that at our peril, is not to see the teenagers and see where their sort of freedoms aren't maybe being given to them, the ones that they wanted. Yeah, Claire, that's right. They're treated it really badly in public spaces. It's complete kind of lack of respect, I think.
Yeah, that's something that I found over a kind of very, very long time period, that age group are treated as a problem, and that nobody really wants to tackle, knows how to tackle. Well, not nobody, some people, but it's not, you know, most people. It's sort of well, they're too difficult to deal with, therefore, and you move on. Mark, do you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, so I'm just looking at a report from Campaign for Better Transport, just for some facts. And I think we've really got to differentiate between London and the rest of the country, because in London, free public transport for everyone, all school children, is a perverse disincentive not to cycle. It's very different elsewhere. We're working for an authority, I won't name names, which is trying to get out of the revenue expenditure for children who are given free public transport to school. If you live over 3 miles, you get free public transport. If you live under 3 miles, you get it if the route is unsafe. So we're working for the education department, who basically wants to avoid paying for those free bus passes for children that will live in 3 miles. £2 billion is spent nationally outside London on supported free home to school transport. £2 billion a year. That's a huge amount of money. And a large proportion of that is for kids that do live within walking or cycling distance to school, but are too scared to do it, whose parents are too scared to do it. So if you can turn that 2 billion revenue funding into capital funding, build routes with that funded by the education department, not by the transport team, then you can save that year on. You can spend the money, capital investment, and do it. And so the Department for Education is a key place to lobby. And no one's really talking to them. No one's talking to schools, school education department, funding departments to look at it. From a corporate point of view, each individual school may have a separate school, may have its own policies, but no one's looking at it in a global national picture. And you know, that's something that really needs pressure put on. I mean, I've raised it with Active Travel England, but you know, they're talking about lots of other things they're worried about, like cuts. But it's a big thing, and council cuts are going to start affecting that. They're going to start looking for things, and they're just going to cut it rather than not invest it. So there's something to work on there. So that's more of an explanation than a question, but it'd be good to think about outside London, what you think about that, Dinah.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. I think, yeah, obviously it's, you know, anyone who's a teenager who lives outside London can't believe how lucky we are to have free buses and even under 11s free tube transport, and it is incredible. I think it's sort of something that the rest of the country, like you say, needs to aspire to. But I would just say, don't forget the teenagers. I think sometimes we're talking about parent transport choices, aren't we? And actually, this is the generation, the secondary school children, who could be being taught that you could be talking about the benefits of cycling to school, the benefits of being healthy, and actually seeing that choice for them as something that they want to do, and how can we support that? You know, my kids at secondary school used to cycle to secondary school, and the school insisted on them wearing black coats, and I just I couldn't understand it. They weren't allowed to wear a high-vis jacket over the coat, and it was just like, I know not everybody agrees with that as a thing, but I just felt like this isn't exactly helping parents feel confident about sending their secondary school children off on a bike on a dark winter's morning. But you know, things like that, where it's like, are we asking the teenagers, because they're old enough to make their own choices, are we hearing it from them and hearing what the barriers are from them?
Yeah, I think Sustrans as well, I think, have always done such a lot on primary, and I guess it would be interesting to see whether that moves on to secondary. And there's this idea that if children are cycling when they're kind of primary age, you've got a better chance of getting them. But it seems, I mean, I'd not really thought about that before, but yes, it's like what happens to them when they go to secondary school? There's 7 years, or where all of that kind of evaporates, I suppose, that kind of like positive thinking. And what does a school street look like for a massive secondary school, on a
absolutely
on a main road?
They should have one too.
David, I'm going to bring you in, and then I think I can't see any more questions. I think we'll have that as the last question.
Yeah, that was absolutely fascinating, Dinah, thank you. But I wonder if, to take out the infrastructure element, it'd be worth doing a study of somewhere, say some parts of Hackney, like round Broadway Market, London Fields, where you've got miles and miles of LTNs in every direction, and it's incredibly safe to cycle and walk, and from a road danger point of view. And just anecdotally, very large numbers of children on their bikes walking, and I don't think there's no need to wear high vis and helmets and everything that's ridiculously off-putting for children. And it'd be nice to go there to see how far it is sort of the teenage attitudes you were describing, and how much that change where you do have perfect infrastructure or almost perfect infrastructure.
Yeah, well, that's the route I'm about to walk home. So I'll have a look. But I think the teenagers might have gone in already now.
Yeah.
No, you're right. I think also the secondary schools need to provide lots and lots of space to lock the bikes up, because that's their number one fear, is their bikes are going to get stolen. Because, like you say, if the routes are really good now in those areas that you just described, and sort of in Hackney, where they're supporting lots and lots of LTNs and lots of safe walking routes, it's no good if you can't lock your bike up when you get to school.
So have you noticed that in Hackney? Is there a problem there, or the schools are often quite sympathetic, aren't they?
Do you know, I don't actually know. I don't know what the data is in Hackney in terms of what the number of kids, teenage secondary school children cycling to school is. I don't think it's huge. It doesn't look very, but there's definitely, you definitely see them on that route that you just described, which I walk on every day. So yeah.
Thanks.
And I don't think we've got any more questions, so I think we'll bring that to a close. But thank you so much, Dinah. Lots of food for thought.
Thanks for having me.
And I'm sure, I don't know if you're able to stick around for a few minutes, but it might be that there are a few things in the chat to pick up. I'm not sure. Moving on, so we now have Mark. Are you here, Mark?
I'm here, Sally.
Oh, there you are. Great. Welcome, Mark. Mark's going to share his good, the bad, and the interesting.
Right, let's see how quickly we can get through all these slides. So those who've been on this as Ideas with Beers might recognise the subject, but I thought it was worth an update and rerunning, especially for Valentine's Day. This is safe for work and at home. So let's go through the joy of kerbs on this Valentine's evening. Interestingly, in my blog, which very, very close to 1 million views now, which is great, Curb Your Enthusiasm is still by far my most popular post, 5,500 more popular than the second most read blog. So people are interested in kerbs, and quite right too. They're not new. Couple of photos here of Pompeii. Kerbs very obviously provided a couple of thousand years ago. Yes, so nothing new on Earth. So what do kerbs do? Here's some obvious things. They retain the edge of the pavement, and I use pavement in terms of the structural description of the various layers of a road or even a footway. Demarcates different uses on a highway, can control and divert surface water. And as you can see in this particular photograph, it's stopping vehicles leaving the carriageway and hitting a very old cast iron bridge out to the left. Subtle things, we use them for pedestrian crossing points. They are used as wayfinding by visually impaired people. We use them to make buses accessible, and we create protected cycle tracks. And here's a curb on a cycle track being used as a footrest. And here's your curb spotter's guide to the basics. So we've got 4 main types: square, bull-nosed, so there's a little chamfer on the top; half battered, which is very, very common, that you see absolutely everywhere; and splay. That particular one is 45 degrees, and as you'll see in a bit, there's some variants on that. Basic grade concrete, all standard dimensions, and we get different radii of internal and external varieties. We have transition curbs, so in the pink there, that goes between a full height curb and it goes down to a drop curb here. I think this is for a driveway. Lots of different types between the different types of curbs. Cheeses, or quadrants, as those that know them. So these are the quarter circle curbs. Here's a pair used at this zebra crossing in 2 varieties, generally 455mm and 305. Lots of the dimensions come from Imperial, which we've metricated and kept. Natural stone, so at the top there, granite, very, very common. Also conservation style, which are concrete but with little bits of quarry risings in there to make them look a bit more natural stone. We can have composite, which are made from resin and quarry dust. We have granulithic concrete, as shown on the cheese up there, which is sort of high granite chip content concrete, which gives us a bit of an old-fashioned 1930s finish here. Cast iron at the bottom here from Bristol, slate, plastic. Essentially, curbs are from materials that people had available at the time, often before we had modern precast concrete. And we also have some bolt down rubber. A couple of examples from Enfield to create cycle track space there. So you boiled your oyster. We could also bring the footway up to the bus. 3 different ways of doing it here. So top left is the Castle curb, as used in Cardiff, I think that one was. Bottom left is curbs just laid 140mm. That's in London, tends to be very compatible with low floor buses. And then on the right hand side, just an example used in Brighton. And you can see somebody getting on the bus there. We've also got curbs for directed water here. So here's 2 channel types. On the left is a square channel. That's actually laid in the road. On the right is a dish channel laid at the back of the footway. Really, we shouldn't be doing that where people are walking, because they can be ankle breakers because of that dish. We've also got something a bit more advanced, 2 for 1, directing water within the curb. So left is beanie block, which are big curbs with holes, and underneath a big channel. The right is ACO curb drain, which is the same kind of principle, but it's a single piece unit. And you can see there on the inside, that's where the water ends up and runs along inside the curb. Both those units, very, very good if you've got hard to drain places, the ground levels are very flat. You can get some really clever systems that have that channel inside the curb that runs at a full. So here's the anatomy, or part of the anatomy of curbs. So when I talk about face, that's the front of a curb as it faces carriageway, cycle track, whatever. The bit you can see. The upstand is that height, which you can see there on the red arrow, and with 2 types of jointing them together, either butt, which is dry laid as it is there, or mortared. So as you'd expect to see with a brick wall, say, line of mortar between the 2 curbs. Here's a cross section through a curb properly supported. So you have asphalt layers. Underneath that, it's called the sub base, which is crushed rock, could be crushed concrete and other materials. And here is a half battered curb cut in half, laid on concrete bed and backing. And if you're doing well, that's laid in one operation for maximum support. But the very, very important thing here is that we've actually got the sub base underneath, decent ground created to bed that curb on. And here we are, some being done. So you can see that curb line on the left hand side there, that's laid on concrete. Then all this grey material underneath, that's the sub base. When it goes wrong, if we don't support our curbs properly, we get cracks. So good example in the photograph, edging curb, laid on concrete, probably laid on the earth. So there's nothing actually supporting the ground there. And you've got this crack. It's been repaired once and it's cracked again. In the image, that's probably the bit to the left there. To the right is you've got a void between the sub bases between the footway here and the cycle track. So need to get that material underneath, get it properly supported. We could go curbless. Here we are near the Hook of Holland, where there's a cycle track. Red is the surface layer, the grey is another layer of asphalt, then under that will be another layer, which is the stone or crushed rock or whatever. So because that's steps, that's how you get the support. So you don't actually need a curb there. Other ways of installing curbs, here's a massive great rock wheel on the left, cutting a big trench through a carriageway. And in the space that's been left, here's the curb being laid for a cycle track. That particular scheme was trying to magic up cycling space from an old advisory lane and a bit of concrete edge to a footway. Now, if there's no interaction between traffic in its widest sense, are curbs needed? Covent Garden here don't particularly need curbs for separating modes of traffic. We need flush curbs. So if you're using wheels, or if you're using a stick, say, or you're using a mobility scooter, we need to have flush curbs. And if we have flush curbs for crossings, we need tactile paving, so those that need the additional information can navigate. Pet Hate on the left, that's been laid with an upstand. It's a trip, it will stop small wheels bouncing over it, which is a problem for some wheelchairs and pushchairs. On the right hand side, that's it done properly. It's nice and flush, nice and easy to use. And if you take one thing away from this talk, curbs at crossings have to be flush. But sometimes we probably make it too complicated for our own good. So on the left, we've tried to put a crossing over one road, crossing over another road. And between the two, the curb is a little bit higher. It's flush where it should be crossing, but it becomes very fiddly and very convoluted. On the right hand side there, we've got some weird tactile paving just because we've gone from a crossing point to a ramp. It's a bit over the top, really. Piece of research done in 2009 by Childs and Childs colleagues for guide dogs. Experimental lab-based study, 36 people at the Pamela Laboratory at University College London. And that looked at different types of curb profiles, different kinds of heights, and how people navigate and use them under lab conditions. And what that study found was that everybody detected 60 millimeters, and that's either stepping up or down, and most people detected 50. But as in all good research, it said more work needed to be done. So I think between there and now, there's loads and loads of different types of curbs, different combinations. We probably need to do a lot more real world testing to find out exactly what does work for different people. Bottom photo there, you've got a curb line, you can just see running there, and then you've got a channel block running there. Same colour, that's actually an upstand, as you can see on the other side. So there's a risk here of somebody who may not be able to make out the difference between the two heights tripping over. Same question as walking. If there's no interaction with traffic, do we need curbs? So we've got three states of protection. Top here is cycle track at carriageway level. So there's a raised curb raised on both sides. The second photo is intermediate level or stepped. So the footway is a bit higher than the cycle track and the cycle track's a bit higher than the carriageway. Or we've got footway level where we've got this demarcation block and you get an absolute rash of tactile paving with footway level cycle tracks. Or you do if you follow the guidance. Some very blue cycling infrastructure next to A13 there. We need forgiving curbs. So two issues here. You've got pedal strike, so that's if you physically catch a pedal on an upstand on a curb, as you can see in the top photo. You've got tram lining, that's if you catch yourself on an upstand as you move between a cycle track and some other surface, as shown in the middle photo. So to counteract both of those, we can use a sloping curb. So that's great from so it's low profile, it's not going to catch a pedal. You can bounce up and down that all day on a bike. And also if you're a disabled cyclist who can't dismount and wheel a cycle, you can actually leave the cycle track to go indoors or into a shop or whatever. However, if there's an issue or a worry or a risk visually impaired people missing that type of curb, think about where it joins at 90 degrees. So if somebody's coming from a footway to the side and they are joining this type of arrangement, maybe to cover that frontage of a side road, we can change that type of curb profile. And then where it's longitudinal, we can go back to something a bit more forgiving. So do we need to separate or integrate cycling with curbs? Depends on the context, really. So on the left, I think that's Amsterdam, where there's a fairly major cycle route which skirts a pedestrian area, but it is on the edge, versus Leicester city centre, where there's cycling facilities around the city centre, but for people getting into the city itself for shopping or work, probably don't need to demarcate. So mention forgiveness, 30-degree curb in the photograph there, which is very, very good for not catching pedals and not getting thrown off by tram lining. But we've got the issue of forgiveness for people cycling versus detectability for visually impaired people versus access for disabled cyclists. So as ever, there's no universal answer with this thing, and it's very context specific. Could using curbs in cycle tracks make it hard for people to cross the street? So this carriageway level cycle track in East London would require people to step down, then step over the extra curb to get across the road. Or actually, do we make sure we provide a lot more crossing positions? Again, no answers, it's all case specific. Some cheeky SUDS action here. So SUDS, Sustainable Drainage Systems, for those that don't know the acronym, and this is really just used in rain gardens and other designs to manage surface water. A couple of simple examples. First one at the top is from the Westway, I think. The second one is from Enfield. Just use different ways of having gaps or drop curbs, let the water into rain gardens. The bumpy blocks there is simply to take the energy out of the water entering the rain gardens to stop the soil being washed away. So we're using curbs to control water to exactly where we want it. Curbs can be better than bollards, so we can use double height curbs to try and stop people driving through places maybe. And we could also use them for continuous footways and cycle tracks. So the footway to the right is continuous and the cycle track to the left is continuous. And we do have some innovation. So since I first did this presentation, we now have UK examples of going Dutch. So I'm not going to try and pronounce the Dutch cycle track curb, but Inretbanden is the access curb, and both of those is shown here on the Coventry Coundon cycleway. So on the left is 50mm high curb, 30-degree splay. You can bounce up and down that on the bike all day. It's absolutely fine and safe. And then we have the entrance curbs on the right, which keeps walking and cycling at the same level, and it forces drivers with the engines to go over the top. So gradually being rolled out all over the place now. It's really good. And if you want to learn more, there's a guide. Probably needs a bit of an update in the face of the new Charcon curbs, but there you go, a quick run round the joy of curbs.
Thank you, Mark. That was amazing. I think Claire summed it up nicely in the chat, saying that a curb loving was just what we needed on Valentine's Day.
Everybody likes curbs.
Everybody likes curbs. We've probably got time for like one or two questions. I can see Sam, have you got a hand up? Do you have a question for Mark?
I do. I'm recovering from a particularly nasty cycling injury caused by a bit of supposed safety infrastructure, which was 3 bollards put across a bike path that resulted in me breaking a collarbone. And I just wanted to sort of show of hands. I was asking around the office, keen cyclists, how many people have been injured by a car, and how many people have been injured by a piece of infrastructure. And far more of us have been injured by a piece of infrastructure, whether they were curbs, speed bumps, bollards, than have ever been injured by cars. And it got me thinking, I couldn't find any data on this, but, you know, how many people die as a result of curbs? So, you know, old folks, if you trip down a curb, if you're sufficiently frail and elderly, you will not recover from that broken hip. So I just wondered whether anyone had any experience, whether we could have a show of hands. I assume there's a lot of cyclists on this forum. How many people have been injured by a curb or other bit of cycling infrastructure or supposed safety infrastructure? Go on, stick your hands up. I got my hand up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
A few people. I have a friend who actually had quite serious concussion after an incident with a curb.
So, yeah, I know someone was killed by one.
Yeah. But
It literally hit the curb. Yeah, at a shallow angle, went over the bars, hit on the corner of the curb, and it killed him. Yeah,
it
so
just shows all the more reasons for well-designed and well-placed curbs.
well, I can't help but think, if you could trust drivers to park sensibly, you wouldn't need a curb. Take them out. My kids scooter to school. Every few months, one of them hits the curb, comes off and injures themselves. And they're lethal things. I wouldn't go whenever. I think it's insane that they exist. Anyway, I'm not visually impaired, so maybe I changed my mind, I've lost my sight. But interesting. What we perceive as something that's supposedly a safety benefit, such as a bollard or a curb. Actually imposes quite a big risk on active travel users.
Thanks, Sam. I'm just conscious of time. We've got one more minute.
Yep.
I'm just looking. Tom has a hand up. Do you have a question? And then perhaps Mark, you could come back on perhaps both of those questions or points. Oh, no, he's gone. Robert, you have a hand up, and we'll take your point. Robert, did you have a hand up?
Yeah. So my issue with curbs is where there's a good piece of cycling infrastructure put in place, and there's a big long run of it, and you're channeled into right angle curbs, and there's no escape route. So often when there's a patch of water or in the winter ice, leaves, stuff like that, you physically can't get out of those. I'm thinking particularly one on Elswick Road, where the rest of it's really good. Is there, what's stopping people other than the older sections where that 30-degree curb has not been available until quite recently, I think? What's stopping people actually saying this is a mandatory, you need to put that kind of thing in place? So you can't, there's places where you just can't escape at all, and you're stuck. And there's long sections in Newcastle which I won't use, because in the winter particularly, when you can't get away from it.
Yeah, I mean, none of it's mandatory. It's down to the individual highway authority and what it decides to do. I've put schemes in before we had the 30-degree curbs by just taking an ordinary half-battered one and laying it on its back, which we stole the idea from Leicester City Council that did quite a few of those. So there were ways of doing it if people put their mind to it. But you're dead right. I think if you've got a drainage problem, there's lots of issues with that. If you've got like a sort of skinny island on one side and the curb on the other side, there is nowhere else to go. So for lots of reasons, and it's complicated in terms of detectability for some people. For me, the 50mm high 30-degree curb is probably the best of all worlds, the best compromise between all users. But we still need to be careful on if people encounter those at 90 degrees who can't quite detect. So we might need to have some local higher curbs for that, but for longitudinal runs where there's very little interaction across the cycle track, that's probably a good compromise position to have. But to retrofit, yeah, lots and lots of work and money to do that.
Thanks, Mark. And I said no more questions, but Claire has raised one in the chat, and so I'll just ask this and then we will definitely close. She wants to know, is there any data on damage to curbs and pavements by vehicles?
The short answer is yes. The long answer is goodness knows how you work it out. I think in terms of claims against highway authorities, trips, slips and falls are by far the biggest set of claims.
Yes, yeah, and I guess probably quite a good way of looking at that. Well, thank you very much. That was a treat for Valentine's Day. And I'm sure everybody will join me in thanking both of our speakers. And just to say that we next